The Proud family, louder and prouder, has been the source of a lot of controversy in terms of political messaging in media. A lot of people seem to feel like it's the epitome of what not to do, and I've already talked about this before. The episode we're looking at today is called Juneteenth, and it's famous for
do something with your white privilege!
So, how bad could it be? How bad could it be? The episode opens up with a shot of all the kids in jail demanding justice. For what, we don't know yet. It has a bit of the vibe of,
"Yep, that's me. You're probably wondering how I ended up in this situation."
It starts proper with a flashback to earlier in this story. We learn that Maya's dad Barry is a relative of Christian A. Smith, the town founder. A celebration honouring this founder is coming up, and the family is kind of excited for him. Maya's other dad, Randall, is even making a meal. The whole town shares this excitement as they prepare to celebrate Christian A. Smith, and they're taught a bit about this at school. We then get an obnoxious caricature out of nowhere picking on Maya for claiming familial ties to the founder.
For one thing, he's a direct ancestor of my father.
Oh no, dear, that's not possible.
Oh, yes, it is.
Maya thinks there's something about the town's history, as she learns about it, that just stinks of slavery. And she's right. She considers what was typically grown in the county, and where they are geographically, and it just seems to fit together. And throughout all of this prep for the celebration going on in school, Maya keeps running into this new student named Emily. Wanting to actually confirm the presence of slavery in the town's history and gather some proof, a pleasant surprise for Maya as a character, she tries researching Christian A. Smith, but can't find anything pre-1900.
What happened?
You're right. There's nothing before 1900. Seems like somebody's trying to hide what Mrs. Smith is up to.
There's some sort of magical block on that information. The preparation for the Founders' Day continues with this adorable little leaf fight, and Emily once again appears to Maya, directing her to the base of the Founders' statue. Buried there, she finds a book, a diary, Emily's diary, and seeing the 19th of June 1862, when the Emancipation Proclamation was given, marked in there, Maya realizes that Emily is in fact a ghost, explaining why nobody else seems to have noticed her. Maya then takes the diary to Brother Kwame, and her and the girls discuss its contents a bit. Maya reads an excerpt.
As Christian Smith would say, stop the festivities. The Negro doesn't have a day.
The group's view on the town founder has of course radically changed, now that he has been revealed to be a massive racist. They also mention, interestingly, Lincoln's idea to ship emancipated slaves away to avoid the social fallout of introducing them to society. Oh, there's such an interesting story behind this, but that's not what this video is about, so I've put a few links in the description. There is a graphic image in one of them of a slave's scarred back, so just be warned. So yes, the show. Maya tells her group that she found Emily's diary because Emily herself showed her. They all laugh at her little ghost story, and honestly, fair enough. But the tide has turned against the founder now, and the girls are ready to get behind Maya. At the end of the day, after school, Maya's household dynamic becomes all weird, kind of out of nowhere, a bit dad versus dad.
I just know that my people wouldn't have done anything like this.
Barry denying that his people own slaves enrages Randall, who immediately hits him with this.
No, I do not understand anything about white fragility.
White fragility? What's that supposed to mean?
You know what it means! You're doing it right now!
Doing what?
Being defensive about race. Robin DiAngelo wrote a whole book about it. Read it. You're on page 39.
This is quite out of character for Barry, which could have been impactful if it was, written competently. Anyway, Maya has just altogether had enough, and seen enough evidence, and decides to take action herself where the adults around her have failed. She stages a protest at the honorary celebration of Christian A. Smith, and is joined by all of her friends. However, when Wiz Kelly objects and summons riot police, everything gets out of hand very quickly. The riot police use way too much force for what's happening, and no parents can get to their kids. It all culminates in them being arrested, the parents convinced their kids are in the right and ready to support them. We're back to the flash forward from the beginning, with all the kids in the jail cell. In the jail cell, Barry has a revelation on the toilet about how wrong he was to think his ancestor couldn't have been involved in this. The family is one again, and all is well in the world. Penny rejects what she considers an improper resolution when proposed to her, and with a hearty battle cry, insists they all stick to their guns. No matter what happens, no matter how long they must languish anguish in jail. No matter what duress they... Oh, then they're out. The episode suddenly changes scenery. They've won now, and Maya is unveiling a new town statue as the town is renamed in honor of Emily the Ghost, the survivor of the Atlantic slave trade. A lot happened in this episode, and let's talk about it. The episode was doing better than usual compared to other political episodes, until kind of the halfway point, where it just got childish and fantastical again. The writers are so apparently unconvinced that they have a substantial story that they have to throw in weird, clunky, racialist lies again.
Sounds like black fragility.
Damn, Tishane. But they do have a substantial story, and creating an antagonist unnecessarily in random white characters, because they're white, is just a strange choice. From this teacher to Barry. No significant portion of Western society today hides slavery as a part of history, and nobody denies it existed. It's the complete opposite. Maya discovering the history of her own town in this whimsical way is enough. The whole episode, and the series in general, seems to take a very simplistic view of race relations. And I get it, it's a kids show, it doesn't have to be a docuseries, but the show goes out of its way to try to discuss race relations, and entire plots are completely rooted in a very simplistic, often plain wrong stance. Strawmen are everywhere, perfectly encapsulated by
Do something with your white privilege!
On a positive note though, and I can't believe I'm saying this, I didn't hate Maya in this episode. She's usually so horrible and self-important, but ignoring the babyish race politics, she's a good protagonist here. She leads an investigation that moves the plot along, what she does makes sense, she's likeable, and she doesn't instantly jump to the whole you people mentality. I mean, she does a bit, but not as much as usual. It also felt like they wanted to make a longer episode, which could have been done much better by cutting down on the jail scenes and some of the conversation in the classroom where Brother Kwame is just standing there. There's a lot of unneeded chatter in this episode. Removing that gives you room to write a more natural feeling ending. As it is, the group's fight for justice is built up from the first second of the episode, and then it suddenly just ends partway through. It's very disjointed. The history aspect is also, of course, worth mentioning. Slaves still having to fight for freedom after the Emancipation Proclamation is a good bit of history to put out there. I'm not sure how aware most people are of that, and of the general idea that you can't legislate away a problem of this magnitude, but that legislature is just part of the journey. And speaking of history, I did also like the use of Emily's diary. Diaries from contemporary people during historical events are extremely useful to academic historians, if the events and where it's found roughly match what you'd expect for the area, just to confirm it is relevant. For example, if, like in this episode, the area has always produced a crop that, during the Atlantic slave trade, was often harvested by slaves, chances are there were slaves there. So it's more than reasonable to treat Emily's diary as a piece of historical evidence. There is a pretty close real-life comparison to this story. It's not one-to-one, but just Google Gastown and read up on Gassy Jack. Enjoy! But the fact that you can draw such a parallel at all lends itself to how real this episode feels in most parts. People discovering and reacting to the dark history of their own hometown has happened before. Conversely though, there was a weird running theme throughout this episode that the history of slavery in the town was being buried, and that it's really hard to find historical records of slavery because of some grand, worldwide, anti-Black American cover-up, and that's just a complete fantasy. They could have taken that aspect out of the episode and it would have been better and more touching for it. Maya discovering this and bringing it to everyone else's attention, maybe even with everyone else being ambivalent, that's enough of a story, and you don't need to create problems that aren't there. I do like these historical elements, and the clunky, childlike way the writers consistently handle racial politics really hurts how interesting that aspect is. Unlike in the so-called colorism episode, which was more about dating preferences and rumours, politics is inherently tied to the topic of slavery and how we look at troubling histories. It was a political matter in 1862 and it's a political matter today. It raises questions like, what can we or can't we claim in our ancestors' histories, whether triumphant or shameful? How do you process difficult legacies that are close to home? Where is the boundary between us and my ancestors? Of course, the Proud Family reboot raises but doesn't respond to any of these questions meaningfully, if at all.
That's enough. The ancestors speak through us all, as long as you're receptive. It's clear that Sister Maya was directed to this diary.
But from what I'd heard about this episode, I was sure they were going to be more obnoxious and white guilty than they actually were, even if they were still a bit obnoxious and white guilty.
White fragility.
Something else that rubbed me the wrong way was Maya's comment after what was a really lovely, heartfelt speech.
However, I'd like to think that all little black girls are spiritual descendants of Emily.
It's just such an American stereotype thing to say. Most black people have nothing to do with the US or West Indies and are consequently not descended from, or personally connected to, those trafficked and brutalized in the Atlantic slave trade. Slaves were also not bought from African warlords because they were black, else Maya might have had more of a point when it comes to saying that all people of black heritage could be Emily's in spirit, that this could always happen again. The hatred of the other was a justification made by civilians and traders alike for the treatment of the Atlantic slave trade victims, but not the cause. This just sounded like US centrism, and I don't have enough faith in the writers of this show for it not to be plausible that it's just US centrism with no thought. On the flip side though, part of being an American is having stories like Emily's in your nation's history, just like anywhere else. Like Maya says, Emily's story is the kind that resonates with a lot of people because it's kept alive, and the victims of atrocities like the Atlantic slave trade are continually humanized through the preservation of these stories, as they should be, including through fictional depictions like Emily. So, all in all, this episode was predictably clumsy, but still had kernels of a well-written story in it, even if the writing team then hired a 12-year-old edgelord to edit the script. While our media is oversaturated with American perspectives when it comes to stories rooted in history, American perspectives like this episode's aren't nearly as common. More episodes like this from other franchises would definitely be well received, so long as they're written for the memory of the victims, and not for the sake of the writing staff feeling good about themselves. Thanks so much for watching, and see you next time for more commentary on Western animation. Bye bye!